Hey, geeks and geekettes, it's time once again for Ask Chuck Dixon. This is episode number 42. Um, let's get right to the questions. Ben Baker, the always reliable Ben Baker, he asks, how can you build suspense in a story? Are there any secret techniques you can share with us? Now, Hitchcock, the acknowledged master of suspense, and I think rightfully so, really, you know, examined the building blocks of what puts an audience on edge. And his theory was that the audience should know from the outset where the danger is coming from, and that there is danger. He didn't like visceral shocks. He didn't like the jump surprise that's used so often in lesser grade horror films, where you just lull the audience into a sense of security and then shock them. He was a proponent of rising dread, that each scene build upon the other to create suspense, to create a sense of danger for the lead characters. And there's a lot of ways to do this. I mean, in Psycho, a movie which no one going to see it for the first time knew what was going to happen. I mean, initial audiences didn't know about the shower scene, didn't know what Norman Bates was about. And yet, if you watch the film Cold, um, it's clear Norman Bates is going to be a problem. What kind of problem, we don't know. But as Janet Leigh goes off and does her business, we keep thinking about this weirdo at the motel registry desk with his stuffed birds and his sort of awkward demeanor, uh, and the odd questions that he asks her. So that's in the back of our mind. Now, to create suspense, you can do all kinds of things. There's little tricks you can use, and they don't always have to involve, stalking psychopaths or rampaging weirdos or whatever. You can create like what I call leitmotif um, suspense in having a character put something in the microwave, and then the scene goes on. In the back of your mind, that microwave is still running. Have a character talking to another character, and there's a phone ringing in the background. It kind of makes you, first of all, we can all relate to those kind of events, and it just puts you on edge just enough. And of course, the microwave dinner or whoever's calling on the phone is not the main thrust of the scene, but it it it's sort of a background thing, that you realize it makes you unconsciously realize that time is passing and something's being delayed, and no one you know likes hearing a phone ringing in the background. And when you put something in the microwave, in the back of your mind, you're aware that it's there. I mean, the timer is going to go off, but you're still aware, I have something in the microwave while I'm whatever, getting my plate and silverware out, whatever you're going to be doing while you're waiting for that meal to warm up. If you see what I mean, these are things that are everyday things, but they can be used to create a sort of, you know, light suspense, a sort of diet suspense in your scene, while more uh, you know, more impactful things for your storyline are going on in the foreground. This is going on in the background. Creates an uneasiness. Maybe not a suspense, but an uneasiness. And that's what you're looking for. It kind of builds. You use it as building blocks, like Hitchcock did in all of his films. You know, a sense of paranoia and suspicion, and looking over your shoulder. It builds and builds and builds. And Hitchcock did the same thing using, ticking clocks or time of day, moving shadows, all kinds of things to create tension in the background. Um, Now, a excellent example that I saw recently of what I'm talking about is a scene from Better Call Saul, the most recent season. And I'm not going to spoil anything, but there's this guy Lalo in the storyline, and he works for the cartels, and he's this mercurial sociopathic character. The actor does a fantastic job. And this character, in every scene he's in, you're never sure how he's going to react to anything. And he's always smiling. He's always joking. He's a really charming guy, as psychopaths can be. He's learned to, have this like verve that makes him attractive to people until they find out what he's about. And then they realize that that very same thing that drew them to him is dangerous. And there's this great scene where some characters we care about are being, basically they're under suspicion from Lalo. And Lalo deals with suspicion basically by, being very careful, um, leaving no witnesses, basically, is how Lalo covers himself. And it's not he doesn't need a lot of proof. He just needs a lot of suspicion. And he takes care of business, if you know what I mean. Well, in this scene where he's obviously threatening these characters, there's a goldfish tank, there's an aquarium, and he's fascinated by it. While he's, questioning these two people, he's got them, basically giving them a third degree. He keeps going over and tapping on the glass of the aquarium. And it's really weird because, very likely that these people that are being threatened by him are going to die at any second. I mean, just things are just going to blow up. He's going to stop smiling, pull out the gun, and just fill them full of lead. But him going over and tapping on the aquarium glass heightens the suspense because, first of all, most of us can't relate to being, in a room with a guy with a gun threatening our lives. But we can relate to that little goldfish, that innocent little goldfish in the tank. It isn't bothering anybody, but Lalo can't keep that goldfish alone. Keeps tapping on the glass. And it really, really cranks it up because, one of the people he's threatening actually is concerned about the goldfish, that he's disturbing this fish. This psychopathic killer is bothering his pet fish, and it's it's like he's transferring his fear for his own life to the fish in the tank. And it's a terrific scene. It's excruciating to watch because there's a lot going on. There's a lot of multi-layer suspense elements in this scene. But that tapping on the glass of the aquarium was a stroke of genius. Whoever came up with that, hats off, because that really brings the scene together, makes it really, really click. All right. Ben Baker with another great question about writing. So I'm going to go into even more depth about how can you get the reader to care about new secondary characters you add to an ongoing story? Every story has ancillary characters, and they all should be, they all should have a life of their own. There's no such thing as a throwaway character. If you've got a character in the background who's just, working at the counter at the 7-Eleven or pumping gas or, whatever, window washer, a waitress, you still want to make them seem like they're alive. You may only take a few lines, but you still want to make them a part of the story. And there's a lot of ways to do this. And one of the ways is you can look at character actors. I've just shown you a few: Walter Brennan, Una Merkel, Peter Lorre, and Alan Hale. Alan Hale, he's the dad of the Alan Hale who played the skipper on Gilligan's Island. Alan Hale was in films all throughout the 30s, 40s, and into the 50s. And he is the most shameless scene stealer ever to appear in Hollywood. But he didn't do it by hamming it up or anything else. Alan Hale always had some sort of bit of business, even if the scene didn't involve him. He had something he would be doing. He would be peeling an apple or winding his watch, straightening his cuffs. He would always be doing something. In movies, when you see the principal talking, the principal character talking, and there's, extras behind him or character actors behind him, they're usually standing listening or whatever. Not Alan Hale. He'd be standing listening, and he looked like he was listening. And listening is a big part of acting. If you can look like you're listening, you're a great actor. Um, but he would always be doing something else, and it would make sure that your eye was drawn to him. That of all the people in the scene, other than the main actors, you would always notice Alan Hale. And I think that's how he got so much work. I mean, audiences loved him. They loved him for that reason. Another shameless scene stealer is always Lee Marvin. Now, Lee Marvin, went on to be a lead actor in the '60s. Big Hollywood movie star. But for much of the beginning of his career, he was a character actor, and he would always come up, just like Alan Hale, little bits of business to get him to be noticed. My favorite that he did was in the movie Bad Day at Black Rock. He came up with the idea that he could not keep his shirt tucked in. So he was constantly tucking his shirt in. And as you watch the movie, you're as involved with whether or not his shirt is tucked properly or not as you are in anything else in the story. So he doesn't have a big role in this film, but he's unforgettable simply because you remember every scene he was in, because he's always in the background fussing with the tail of his shirt. And just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And, in character actors, that's their meat and potatoes. They got to get noticed. They got to get noticed not by the audience as much as by filmmakers, so that they get asked for. Hey, this is a perfect role for Franklin Pangborn. Get me Franklin Pangborn. Um, Another example of how to build characters quickly is in the movie Rear Window, another Hitchcock film. Let's go back to Hitchcock. There's nothing wrong with going back to Hitchcock over and over again, in my opinion. He was not only a great film director, but a keen student of story. In the film Rear Window, if you've never seen it, and if you haven't, you must. Um, Jimmy Stewart has his leg broken. He's confined to his apartment. He's a magazine photographer, and he spends his convalescence spying on his neighbors. He's in a courtyard apartment, so he can see like these dramas playing out all across this courtyard. And what he witnesses was what he thinks is a murder, and the murderer is Raymond Burr. Now, the whole film is from Stewart's point of view. We never leave the apartment. We only see what he can see from his window. Brilliant, and it's brilliantly done. Well, eventually, Raymond Burr realizes what's going on, realizes who's spying on him, realizes who's, accusing him of murder, and comes to visit Jimmy Stewart, who is trapped in a wheelchair with his leg, he's got like a hip to ankle cast on. He ain't going nowhere. So he's trapped. And Raymond Burr comes in. Raymond Burr's a big guy, big imposing guy. Comes in, he's standing in the darkness. And here's this killer. This guy's killed his wife and buried her in the backyard. Or maybe severed her body into many parts and carried her out in suitcases. We don't know, but we know we're as convinced as Jimmy Stewart is that he murdered his wife. And when he shows up in the doorway, he lets us know. Now, this is our first direct encounter with Raymond Burr, because as I said, we can only see him from a distance from Jimmy Stewart's window. Now we're seeing him up close. He's got dialogue. He's speaking directly to Jimmy Stewart. And these are really the first real dialogue we hear from this character. And he's a character. Obviously he's the villain. He's a murderer. He's menacing, and yet he stands in the darkness and has this very, very affecting scene with only a few lines of dialogue, in which he says, "What do you want?" He doesn't know what Jimmy Stewart. Well, he doesn't know who Jimmy Stewart is. He's, "What do you want? Why are you doing this? What do you want? Do you want money? I don't have money." He's pleading. The murderer, the villain, the bad guy is pleading. He's pleading with Jimmy Stewart. He's vulnerable. And in those few seconds, or for those few seconds, he has our sympathy. Because we've all been in a situation where we were being put upon by somebody, and we just want a way out. We just want to, why are you doing this? What do I have to do to get out of this situation? And that's where Raymond Burr is. He's cornered, not Jimmy Stewart. He's the one that's cornered. And in that moment, he becomes this full-fledged character. He's no longer a symbol of evil or anything else. He becomes a human being with wants and desires and everything. You begin to wonder, well, why did he kill his wife? I mean, maybe he was the one wronged in this situation. Maybe that was his only way out of a bad situation, was to murder his wife. Our moral compass is set spinning with just those few lines of dialogue. That's how you do it. Doesn't take much. It does not take much. Now, I'm going to give you a really, really 101 on building secondary characters. The television series Monk, if it is probably the best written television series ever to air, in my humble opinion. The writer's room there, they had lightning in a bottle. They had a great character, and they had everybody in that writer's room and all the other writers they hired, they knew how to construct each episode of Monk. Each one is a gem. They knew how to construct an excellent mystery. They knew how to build character. They knew how to move action. They knew how to utilize an ensemble cast, how to move subplots along, everything just clicks on this show. If you've never seen it, you really need to check it out. It's a writer's writer kind of show, because the writing is everything on the show. It's brilliantly acted, beautifully shot, and it's a terrific cast, stellar cast on the show, but the writing is the real star here, and I'm going to show you a little bit of why. Okay, there's an episode called Monk and the Paperboy. I'm going to go deep here. So relax, sit down, get yourself something to drink. It's an episode called Monk and the Paperboy. And the episode opens with two guys in a pickup truck. They're driving through Monk's neighborhood, and they're delivering newspapers. And they have an exchange. They're going to be going on vacation or something. I forget what it is. But they have this exchange, and we learn a little bit about them. We learn that they're brothers, and we learn that one of them is very fastidious because as they reach Monk's house, the brother in the back of the truck is going to throw the newspaper onto the step of the building. And his older brother gets out of the truck and says, no, that's Mr. Monk's paper. You can't throw it on the step. You have to place it at his door. So the younger brother climbs out of the truck, and he goes and puts the paper on the steps. He doesn't throw it. He puts it on the steps. But in that moment, as he turns to go back to the truck, we see a sinister figure in the foreground. Someone is lurking in the shadows, watching. And, okay, so he gets back to the truck, and his brother says, you can't just throw it on the step. You've actually got to put it in front of Mr. Monk's door. That's the way he likes it. So the brother's like, oh, okay. And he goes back to the front step of the house, and the newspaper's gone. I mean, he was there just a few seconds ago. He just dropped it, but it's gone. We know it's the sinister figure lurking in the foreground who took it. He goes back to his brother, and he says, the paper's gone. I don't know what happened to it. He goes, well, here's another one. Now put it in front of Mr. Monk's door. This time do it right. So the brother goes to Monk's door, and he puts the paper down. And he comes back, and his brother says, now you put it straight on the doormat, right? You didn't just throw it down. You made sure it's straight, because Mr. Monk likes his newspapers straight. What are we doing here? We're establishing basically that these brothers, they've got a brotherly rapport. One's a little bit of a slacker. The other one's real fastidious. But they're both conscientious about their job. These are good guys. They're young kids, probably working their way through college, delivering papers, whatever. But we like them. We start to like them. The other thing we're establishing here, for people who have never seen the show, is that Monk has a bit of a problem. We understand without before we even see Mr. Monk that he has OCD. He doesn't just have a problem with his newspaper. It's more than that. Okay, so older brother gives the younger brother a new paper to take back to Mr. Monk's doorstep. But in the meantime, that sinister figure that we saw earlier is now at Mr. Monk's doorstep, stealing the second newspaper. Okay, the mystery deepens. What the hell? Why would anyone steal a newspaper, let alone steal two newspapers? So we're building a mystery here. Now, the screen time, 45 seconds. 45 seconds have elapsed. And we have established the character of these two characters in the truck, the two paper boys. We like them. We've decided we like them. We know they're in danger. we've learned about Mr. Monk that he's, a control freak. And we've begun a mystery, a real mystery. Why would anybody be stealing newspapers? So the kid comes back with the newspaper. He comes back to straighten the newspaper on Mr. Monk's doormat, and runs into the sinister, lurking stranger. And there's a struggle. It's like, what are you doing? What are you doing taking the newspaper? So there's a struggle, and it gets violent. And the older brother sees this, and then he sees his brother being thrown, probably 10 feet to the sidewalk by this mysterious stranger. And the brother lands badly. And anybody watching television, anybody in the television watching habit knows in a story like this, a fall like that, you're dead. He falls, he breaks his neck, whatever. But he's been murdered. And the older brother is bereft. And we're bereft too, because we kind of like these kids. We've grown to like them. We've grown to understand them. And he basically like, why? Why would anybody kill someone for a newspaper? And boom, the show begins. About 1 minute and 45 seconds have passed. And look at all that information. Look at all that information. Plus, they've built a mystery. And this is, I know I said every episode of Monk is a gem, but this is a particular jewel in the crown because, we go on with a mystery about why someone would be willing to murder to steal Mr. Monk's newspaper. And then Mr. Monk goes on to assume that there's something in the newspaper that someone didn't want him to see. And so he and the police and his assistant Sharona begin going through the newspaper, and they go through it with a fine-tooth comb. And in the process of just reading newspaper articles, Mr. Monk solves a hit-and-run murder in San Francisco, the city he lives in, and he also solves a murder that occurred in Paris just by reading the newspaper article. And so you get those wonderful scenes, and then it goes on to, why was the newspaper stolen? This nagging mystery of why the newspaper was stolen. And there's a lot of red herrings, and it comes to absolutely brilliant conclusion, brilliant, suspenseful conclusion in the story as the events build up, a seamless mystery. But you see what they did there in well under 2 minutes. They laid down the tracks for a great story, but more importantly and more specific to this question was they established these characters, these secondary characters, who we will never see again in the story. But it was important that we care about them. Otherwise, the mystery makes no sense to us. It's not one of these cold-blooded Agatha Christie type, paint by number mysteries where we don't care about the victims. The writers of the Monk Show know that for you to get yourself involved in these stories, you've got to care about what the murderer did. You got to care about the injustice of it all. You have to care about the fate of the victims. And this, 1 minute, 45 seconds, 1 minute, 50-second sequence did it all. Beautiful. Earlier, in an earlier video, I said I would start talking about some writers that I like, writers that I admire, and there are many of them. Richard Dooling is one. Richard Dooling has not written a lot of books, but each one of them is wonderful. he's a doctor, medical doctor, and a lawyer, both, and he writes on both subjects in his books. And he's, White Man's Grave is a terrific novel about a businessman whose son disappears in Sierra Leone while on a Peace Corps mission, and the father's attempts to find him. And it is just a whopper of a novel. Bet Your Life is a novel about life insurance scamming, and it's the best suspense novel about insurance written since Double Indemnity. Critical Care it's about an ICU doctor who becomes attracted to one of his patient's daughters. and keeps the poor man alive through, extended and radical methods, just so he can keep seeing the daughter. Very, very dark comedy. But his masterpiece is Brainstorm. Brainstorm is about a lawyer who never goes to court, but his law firm assigns each uh, member of the firm uh, a public defender case each year. It's part of their policy. And he ends up having to defend the guy on the basis of hate crime, and tries to get him off of it, tries to get him off the charges. The man has killed his, he's killed an African American man who was teaching his wife sign language. He's a deaf African American man. So it's like a triple hate crime. And the guy is, a racist. But that's not the reason he killed the guy. That's what it gets down to. So it's kind of a little bit of a murder mystery, but it's mostly an indictment of hate crime legislation. And in the story, it's called Brainstorm because the lawyer gets the alleged murderer into a program to basically have his brain rewired by a radical neurosurgeon. And the idea is that they would excise the racist portion of his brain. I don't want to say more about the novel. It's freaking brilliant. I've read it like 5 times, and it balances all the legal aspects and the medical aspects and everything else perfectly. And it's darkly funny as well as suspenseful. And I wish the guy wrote more. He's not terribly prolific, but those are the novels he wrote, and he's worth checking out. And he's probably an author you've never heard of. So there you go. Jim Vale says, who are some of your favorite Golden Age characters? Well, I have a lot of Golden Age characters I like, but I like them. I like the characters, but I don't really like the comics. You know what I mean? Golden Age comics were kind of crapped out for the most part by people who would rather be doing newspaper comic strips or writing for the newspaper. A lot of the talent in Golden Age comics was slumming, and they pretty much approached the medium in that way. But some didn't, and Jack Cole was one of them. Plastic Man is probably my favorite Golden Age character. Plastic Man stories by Jack Cole, and then by the people who followed Jack Cole when he left Quality Comics. The people who followed, they did a good job as well. Continuing the kind of frantic, kinetic, crazy stories that Plastic Man came up with, or that Jack Cole came up with for Plastic Man. Cole was a terrific storyteller, a fantastic cartoonist, and he jams these stories with so many great ideas. These are just seamlessly plotted, um, amazing, indelible characters. Uh, I don't believe he ever repeated a villain, maybe once or twice, but each story would come up with a brand new bad guy who was special in their own right, and a great new situation, some way that, some trouble that Woozy Winks has gotten him into, or someone who wants to use Plastic Man's abilities for their own evil ends, or, simple heist stories or robbery stories or whatever, with Plastic Man, the most unlikely FBI agent of all, on track of them. And they're primarily comedy stories. They're funny stories, but Cole never shortchanged the plot. He always came up with interesting plot lines for them, and he, they're just great stuff. I mean, a lot of these stories are like laugh out loud funny, but there's also a story uh, behind them. Another great Golden Age character, the original Captain Marvel, to my mind, the only Captain Marvel, and these were, like I said, a lot of times these guys were slumming that were writing these, and a lot of these stories are written by Otto Binder, who was a science fiction author. He wrote for the science fiction pulps, but he didn't hack. He didn't act like he was slumming. Captain Marvel stories are very different from Superman stories, but they are generally well thought out. There's a lot of like great ideas in these stories, and they're there's some repetitive stuff. I mean, in almost every single story, Billy Batson gets gagged so he can't say Shazam, or knocked unconscious so he can't say Shazam and turn into Captain Marvel. But that's just kind of a given. You know, that's like Lois getting kidnapped. It's like that's going to happen in a story. But the rest of it, the terrific science fiction concepts. A lot of them are funny. They're certainly charming. Captain Marvel was written for children, but not written down to children. The creators of Captain Marvel never pandered. And of course, you got the artwork of C.C. Beck and Kurt Schaffenberger and guys like that. And it's just, wonderful entertainment. I really, you know, I've had a chance recently to read some reprints, bootleg reprints of these characters, quite a few, and I'm really, really impressed with them. Another great Golden Age character is the Black Cat. Black Cat's a creation of Lee Elias, and she's a stunt woman in Hollywood. And again, these are fun, light mystery, crime type stories, but um, Elias makes sure that there's a plot line, that there's a real story and characters you care about and things like that. These are well crafted. This is not someone writing with contempt for the medium. This is someone who's giving their best. And I really enjoy these stories. Characters are so likable. The artwork is so appealing. And there's lots of action and suspense and funny moments. And it twits Hollywood quite a bit, making fun of directors and agents and things like that. It's a neat backdrop, the different backdrop for a Golden Age character, the movie making business. Another really wacky Golden Age series, also by Jack Cole, is Death Patrol. And Death Patrol was a rave up World War II aviation strip that was frankly nuts. And the idea behind Death Patrol was that in each story, these oddball characters you can see here, and they always changed. These oddball characters would go to war against the Axis powers, shooting down Nazis and Japanese Zeros, and in each story, one of them would die. Hence, Death Patrol. So it's like Jack Cole got onto a gimmick that would drive so many 80s and 90s comics, the gimmick of killing a character. And the stories are zany, to say the least. Joe Ketterer, he asks, how did you get the Alien Legion gig? Did writing alien sci-fi war stories require anything different fundamentally from other war stories? Any places you wanted to go with the characters that you didn't get to go? Yeah, man, this series was great. I remember when I first saw it, I was like at a book fair and I first saw the announcement and Marvel had set up a booth and I saw Alien Legion. I was like, whoa, I wish I'd thought of that. Little did I know I would get offered to participate in all this fun. Archie Goodwin was the editor of the Epic line where Alien Legion was at home, and Archie had seen my work on Airboy and liked it. And I had spoken to Archie. I had interviewed with Archie at Marvel a number of times, so he knew who I was. And I believe we had some sort of a rapport. He seemed to enjoy talking to me. And he remembered me when I was on Airboy. And of course, at the same time, I was writing Savage Sword of Conan for Larry Hama. But Archie was most impressed with my work on Airboy. And he told Carl Potts about it. And Carl was, he didn't know me. He wasn't sure. But he was going to go along with Archie's recommendation. And, they brought me onto the book. And I never left. Carl was very happy in the end with what I did, and I developed a professional relationship with him as well. He went on to edit. Him and Marcus McLaurin in the Epic offices went on to edit a lot of work that I did for Epic, and yeah, I really dug working on this. And yeah, they were intrinsically war stories, but I kind of married them to crazy sci-fi ideas, like the Legion gets trapped in the event horizon of a black hole, only to find that many of their enemies are trapped there as well. And they're basically going in circles around this black hole until eternity. And, friend and enemy have to ally to escape the fate of being, sucked into a dark continuity. So a singularity, I should say. and that was a fun one. But there were lots of others. Were there any I didn't get to? Yeah, a there was a proposal. I was going to do a thing called Carnivora, and it was a planet where it's basically the most recent Alien movie. It's like every species on this planet was deadly. Everything on this planet was eating each other. There were no sheep and wolves. Everything was a wolf, and the Legion crash lands there, and has to survive. And I really wanted to get around to that story. Every once in a while, Carl reminds me of it, about the planet Carnivora. Maybe someday, maybe someday. But I got to explore a lot of great stuff in this series, and in the series, and then in a series of graphic novels and prestige miniseries and stuff like that. Um, love these characters. I loved working with Larry Stroman as well. Stroman drew any kind of crazy alien that I came up with, because my thing with Alien Legion when I took it on was they were all basically humans. It's like an episode of Star Trek. They were humans with funny heads, and I'm like, no, I want to, I want real aliens. I want a guy made out of gelatin. I want a praying mantis. I want crazy looking stuff. And about 4 or 5 issues into my run, Larry Stroman and I were talking on the phone. He says, I drew these characters in silhouette boarding a spaceship. And he says, and I realized by their silhouettes, wow, you really changed the cast of this book. There's like every kind of critter you can imagine. They're not just human beings with funny heads anymore. So that's how I got the job. That's how I approached it. And I had fun every minute working on it. Levi Sweeney, question for the podcast. What makes a story original? I've heard that true originality is obscurity of source, but what do you think? Well, I'm not going to go into the whole Joseph Campbell thing the way I did last time because, frankly, that's exhausting. But yeah, what's the source of a story? The source of a story is your own psyche, your own mind, your own imagination. Now, yes, if you read novels, watch movies, watch TV, whatever, listen to other people talk, you're going to have ideas thrown into the hopper of your mind. But the way that they come out of you is original. And I don't care about the source. Unless you're hacking, unless you're intentionally plagiarizing, unless you're like, hey, that's a great idea, I'm going to steal that idea. I'm going to steal that cowboy movie idea and recast it as a space opera. Unless you're doing that, I'm looking at you, George Lucas. Unless you're doing that, whatever story you come up with is a product of all the variables in your mind, and everybody's mind is unique. Everybody's mind is unique. We're not stamped out of a mold. We are not a cookie cutter species. We are individuals. If you've ever owned a pet, you realize that animals are individuals. There's no one dog mind, horse mind. They're all different. They all have their own character. And I think a lot of it is genetics. If you have kids, you understand this as well. A lot of times kids are born with the majority of their personality. There's no, there's no environment that's going to change them very much. And spookily, I know with one of my kids, he's very much, he is my father. He's like my father recreated. Everything about him, his attitude, I mean, spooky. But still, he's not the same as my father because the variables in, brain chemistry, structure, whatever. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to get scientific on you. But, if you think of it, maybe it's not a new idea, but it's your version of that idea. And particularly in story, where there's also so many variables, and a lot of times, you're unconsciously tapping into sources you don't realize, or you don't remember. And it's one of the great fears that a writer has, is that they're unconsciously imitating someone else. But Moby Dick, which I use as an example, I mean, what was the source? Herman Melville was a whaler. He spent time whaling. He was a crew member on a whaling ship, and he heard the stories about this rogue whale out in the Pacific. And There weren't a lot of details or anything else, but there's a rogue, spooky whale. Now, maybe it was legend, maybe they were tall tales, maybe they were just guys getting drunk and making stuff up. But he heard these stories, and a lot of people heard these stories, and he thought, well, he'd write a novel about it. And it, if you ever read Moby Dick, and more importantly, put Moby Dick in the context of its time period, it's an amazing novel, particularly for the time in which it was written. It's really the first action adventure novel ever written. Yeah, there's Three Musketeers and the rest of them, but nobody wrote action the way Melville did. Whole chapters of guys fighting the sea and chasing down whales and throwing harpoons and battling storms, all the rest of it. It's a tremendous action novel, and it's pretty much a crazy idea too. I mean, this is a real high concept novel, a novel which was not popular in Melville's lifetime. Its reputation came after his death, when it was elevated in the eyes of the literary world to be a worthy work of fiction and a superior example of an American novel. But it's, you know, how far from the source did he get? I mean, Moby Dick is undeniably original. It's undeniably original. And, I don't know what more to say on this subject, except that you got to give the writer some credit. You can't just say there's nothing new under the sun because you don't know that, if you're a writer, you might stumble on a brand new plot line, a whole new concept that hasn't been covered before. And even if you're dealing in genre fiction, where you're dealing with, standard tropes and standard kind of plot lines and formulas and stuff like that, you're still adding your variation to it. It's like people that like classical music and they can hear the difference between one variation of a Beethoven piece and another. I can't. Most people can't, but they know the nuances. Or myself with Westerns. I love Westerns. And people go, how can you watch one Western after another? They're all the same. Yeah, primarily they are all the same, but I'm into the nuances, the little things that make this one special or make this one different. So there you go. My long-winded answer about that quote about originality and distance from the source. Okay, Jack. In one of your first vids, you talk about how comic book creators have been forgotten. I'm wondering what comic creators you think are underrated and overlooked by even the comic community. Well, there's so many. But I'm going to talk about two. Owen Fitzgerald. Owen Fitzgerald was a cartoonist. He worked primarily in the 40s all the way up into the early 60s. And his longest run, I think, was on Bob Hope Comics, the early Bob Hope Comics. You can see here, this guy's consummate cartoonist. And he was known for, his attractive or cute women, which, are an example here. And he did a lot of that. He had his own series at DC called Here's Howie, and it was kind of DC's answer to Archie. But they eventually had their version join the army during the Korean War. And he had a decently long run on this while still working on Bob Hope. And remember, these were 52-page comic books. And in the case of Bob Hope, every page was drawn by Owen Fitzgerald. The Bob Hope comics were one long story, basically a graphic novel every month. And, Fitzgerald kept up, man. This guy was good. Look at this fluid style, kind of New Yorker cartoon style, but just assured, confident. And he, as I said, he specialized in, cute or attractive women stories. In, in comics like the unfortunately named Dizzy Dames, which was just a whole bunch of stories about women who were slightly off or goofy or cloying or, not thinking straight. It was a genre before feminism. And this was a great series called Starlet O'Hara about a girl who works in a mailroom of a major Hollywood studio trying to get her break. Her and her friend Fritzy constantly trying to get their big break to become actresses, and it's fun stuff. This is another example from I believe Dizzy Dames. That was the name of the comic, Dizzy Dames. And then he went on to be a major contributor to Dennis the Menace comics from the 50s through the 60s. And, his loose animation type style really lent itself to Hank Ketcham's creation. But Fitzgerald deserves to be better remembered than he is. Now, here's another one. Don Heck. Don Heck is probably the most maligned comic artist of all time. I mean, when I was growing up, well, actually, when I entered fandom, I mean, I never thought about Don Heck one way or another. I mean, I bought books that Don Heck did, and I liked his stuff well enough. But it wasn't until I got into comic fandom that I realized I hated this guy. People hated him. They wanted him fired. They didn't like how he drew superheroes, even though he is famous for his long run on the Avengers. He had the unenviable position of following Jack Kirby on the Avengers, and stayed with the title for quite a while until John Buscema took it over. And the thing about Don Heck is, as I found in later years, and as I said, I wasn't a Don Heck fan, but I wasn't down on him either. I mean, seeing his name on a book wouldn't stop me from reading it. Of course, he's also famous for Iron Man. He was the first artist on Iron Man. And, yeah, I like this stuff. I like this pre-superhero Marvel monster stuff, especially. Stan Lee would write stories obviously geared toward Heck's talents, which I'm going to get into right now. But in later years, I found out that before doing superheroes, which was never his favorite genre, Heck made quite a name for himself in Western comics. If you ever see any of these, they're marvelous, just beautifully, beautifully drawn. And these were the genres he liked. He liked the action adventure, the spy stuff, the detective stuff, and war comics as well. He's an excellent artist on war comics for a number of companies. And my favorite creation of his was in Atlas Comics. Atlas Comics had a long-running series of Navy comics. They were war comics that focused on the Navy. And Heck had a long-running series, 25 stories. That's pretty long for an Atlas war comic. 25 stories of Torpedo Taylor. Torpedo Taylor was the torpedo man aboard a sub in World War II in the Pacific. And these are just marvelously drawn stories. Just look at this stuff. It's just, the draftsmanship is beautiful. Heck's devotion to the Milton Caniff style is very clear in these stories, and he's into it. He's real into it. More into it than he ever was into superheroes. In his defense, he's a terrific draftsman. He's a wonderful artist, but superheroes, they weren't his thing, and he was being asked to, ape this artist and ape that artist, and he wasn't as into it. So the superhero stuff, no, it's not his best work. There's nothing wrong with it. It's perfectly competent. It's good stuff. Some of it's very effective, but, it wasn't his main thing. I don't understand why at Marvel they didn't, switch him over to Westerns and war stories more often, but they didn't. DC as well. I would have loved to have seen his take on, Sergeant Rock or the Haunted Tank. It would have been brilliant, I'm sure. Plus, he was a heck of a guy. Bo Smith introduced me to him at a convention. I spent quite a bit of time with him. When you go to a convention, you sit next to someone, you talk to them as much as you do to the fans. And just a wonderful, gracious, self-effacing guy. And he deserves a better reputation because he was a mega talent. And he was there at the dawn of the Marvel Age of Comics and was a huge contributor. Iron Man is every bit as big a contribution, obviously, to the Marvel Universe as was, Spider-Man on the Fantastic Four. And he deserves credit for that. All right, if you like this video, and why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you like this video? Tell your friends about it. If they're comic geeks or they're into writing or they want to look into the perverse workings of a writer's mind every Wednesday, let them know. Let them know. And, hit the like button. Doesn't cost you a dime, but it helps me out. It helps YouTube out to reach new people. And that's about it for this week. I will see you all down the road.